My name is Karamalegos. I'm going to talk to you about universal React apps using next.js, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this. So, does anyone know why elevators have mirrors? I know this is going to sound really random. Yeah. To make them seem bigger. Yes, I think that is also a thing. But like, why do they have them outside the elevator? Outside, yeah. Exactly. So basically, the gist is people, I don't know which building this was they originally discovered this in, but people were complaining because they were having really long wait times for the elevators, but it's really expensive to add elevators. So what they did was they put mirrors on the outside so that people could entertain themselves by watching themselves, or as I like to call it, be entertained by their own narcissism. So I don't think that's the official reason, but anyway, so I want you to keep that just stashed in the back of your head, and we'll come back to it later. So why am I talking about universal apps and next.js? One, performance matters, and shipping code matters. So what do I really mean by that, though? So 53% of mobile site visits are abandoned if pages take longer than 3 seconds to load. This was in 2016, so it's starting to get dated, because 2 years is so long ago. But this is real data aggregated by Google Analytics, because DoubleClick is a Google company. And also, JavaScript is your most expensive asset. So for example, if I have a JavaScript bundle that's only 170 kilobytes compared to a JPEG image that's 170 kilobytes, the JPEG, you probably can't see this, but the JPEG will take about 3.4 seconds to load, and actually the bundle of JavaScript would too. But then it only takes 65 milliseconds to decode the image, and then like 28 milliseconds to rasterize and paint it. Versus JavaScript, am I supposed to stay only on this side? Am I breaking the rules if I go over here? It's hard to be too serious on this stage. But, whereas with JavaScript, we have, of course, the same 3.4 seconds to load, but then you need like maybe a whole 2 seconds to parse and compile, and another 1.5 seconds in execution. So it's your most expensive asset. So you want to be really careful about how much JavaScript you send to the client. In addition to this, users have bad phones on bad networks. What do we usually develop on? Wait, what's in your pocket? Is it like, it's like an iPhone X or 10 or whatever they call it, or a Pixel 2 XL. But what do your average users actually have? It's like, or at least for Google, of course, not all of our apps are around the world applications, but for Google, they use like an average of like a $200 Motorola phone, and they estimate like I think they program for like a slow 3G network. So 75% of mobile connections are on 2G or 3G. That's a lot, and it's like 45% of them in total are just on 2G. So that's crazy, right? Like, it's slow. And then there's like a 2 to 5x difference in processing power for phones. So there's like a huge difference between like the best phones and the worst phones. But we keep programming or optimizing for things on our phones, because that's what we have, and we test it out on there. So keep in mind that what your users experience is worse than what we experience. But we keep pushing more and more code and bytes to the client. Stop. I like my gifts. Oh, it's a little bit dark in there, but it's like a baboon. He's like angry at the computer, so I'm just going to throw it away. So yeah, we're making the client do more and more. We're making these crap phones on crap networks take more and more data and do more stuff there. So I want you to take back your rendering. For initial load, we should render and fetch data on the server, because your server is going to have more processing power. And then you only have to serve up what's already rendered. And the users get a faster experience. And thanks to Kasha, you actually saw a side-by-side comparison of the rendered program. And then in addition to that, though, it'd be really cool if future navigation paths, like say I'm on a home page and I go to the About page, when I click on that, I want it to act like a single-page application where it just instantly shows up. And so there's this magical concept of prefetching. So even if, while I'm on a page and I'm browsing that page, the future links, or all the links that are on that page, those start asynchronously loading in the background, so they're just sitting there waiting. So that's really cool. We can kind of hijack that whole download, parse, and compile in the background. And then I don't have this on here too, but if you even want to go further than this, then you should look at progressive rendering. But that's not what this presentation is about. We don't want to go too far. So how do we do this? How do we write code that can work on both the server and the client? Well, universal, if you've heard this term universal, that's what it means. It's JavaScript or code that can run on both client and server, or basically multiple environments. Isomorphic is another term. People don't use it as much anymore, but yeah. So because we have Node now, we can actually do this with JavaScript. We can write it on both the client and the server. But how do we do that well? So in practice, I guess I went too fast. In practice, this is not too easy to set up, because there's actually different concerns, or like the server doesn't act exactly like the client, so it can get annoying. And most of us are developers that have to ship code, right? Like, we're not just sitting there in our offices, like pondering, what's the coolest way I can do this, right? No, they're asking us to like deliver stuff. And so we don't want to waste our time playing around with things and configurations that might not work. So next.js, which is written by Zeit, and I'll show you their website in a bit, which is written on next.js. But it's a minimalistic framework for universal or server-rendered React applications. You can also do statically pre-rendered or statically exported applications. So kind of like Gatsby, you can generate static web applications as well. And the really cool thing is that you just need one command to do this. It's basically like create React app, but what it does is it gives you a setup that's automatically set up for either server or client rendered React. So let's learn more about this. What are the benefits? We're going to dive into the code too, but first, what are the benefits? We get faster page loads because it's server rendered by default for initial load. But then you can also enable prefetching for future routes, and it's literally like a one-word addition. And then it also does automatic code splitting. So say I'm on one route, I'm on like my index page, I don't actually get the code for the about route unless it's used on my page. So we're splitting up our bundles so that we're not loading everything for the entire application at once. There's also no build configuration, which can make you happy if your job is actually shipping code. So it has a simple page-based client-side routing, which we'll see in a second. But also like Babel and Webpack and hot module replacement, these are all automatically set up for you. You don't have to worry about setting those up yourself. But if you like to set those up yourself, you can use your own Babel and Webpack configurations. You can actually customize the setup. You can also customize or use they have a custom server API, and you can use any, like Express, you can use any Node HTTP server that you like. So say, we'll see an example where we would use that inside the application, but also if you're trying to connect to like your own database or something like that, you can just hook into the API rather than using the default one. So that's really cool. It's nice to know those benefits, but how does it work? I feel like you get a hammer and you just bang on the engine, and that's how it works, right? This is how we all work on cars. Or we don't work on cars anymore. I have a Prius. I opened my Prius one time, and I was like, I don't even know. Like, what is this? So there's no build config needed, right? To create a project and install, So I guess I lied earlier. There's 2 commands you need. You have to npm install it along with React. But you also have to make a directory called pages. I know that sounds funny, but it won't work until you make this directory called pages. And then you add a few scripts, like a few basic scripts. And then you can run npm run dev. And automatically, you'll get a formatted 404 page. I'll actually show you what that would look like. This is, don't look at that yet. Wait, OK, now you can look. So this is what it would look like. It's a 404 page that's unformatted, because we don't have any content. So basically, nothing is found. Now I have to find my mouse. There it is. All right. So automatically, you got all those things for free. And the API is mostly the folder system. So that's why I had to add that pages folder. Let me see if I can get this to work. Yeah, spotlight. All right, so you see this pages folder. That's almost the entire API. There's more to it, but that's how basic it is. Every file in that folder represents a route, and that's it. So the name of the file is going to be your URL or your path. So your home page is, of course, should be named index. Index.js will end up being your home page, or just like your / route. About will be /about. And then they also they've already set up a static folder for you. So if you have static files, like I have my Galaxy image, which you saw because you probably looked before I told you it was OK to look. That's where my image is. That's set up for you, and that's just automatically copied into your bundle. So how do we navigate in the client? Well, we use the link API. How many of you have used React Router? So it's like React Router. Instead of using an anchor, you would use a link. That comes from the API. What I like about this one instead is that the attribute for the path is still href, like an anchor. I always mess this up in Router. I always try to do href, and it doesn't work, because you're supposed to use 2, I think, right? So yeah, it's href. And it does client-side navigation and client-side rendering of that target component. It is a higher-order component, so you have to give it a child that's renderable and accepts an on-click event, so like an anchor or a button, div, whatever. And you have to apply style to that child component. It won't actually accept any style, or it just won't work. So that's cool, but that wasn't the coolest thing, right? Like we still want to be able to do that cool thing I called prefetching. So we can hydrate the client with future navigation paths, which is like amazing. Like Cookie Monster and slow motion with his cookies. It's like getting all the cookies at once. Sorry, I entertain myself. I actually don't need you to do this. So all you have to do is add this prefetch attribute to the link. And that will prefetch the component's JSON representation in the background via a service worker. It does not trigger unnecessary data fetching. So this might be easier to explain just showing you a web page. So I try to explain it, and then I start seeing deers in the headlights, and that's not helpful. So right now, it is fetching my home page. But you see I have a navbar up here. So I'm on my home page of my very super cool Star Wars application. I mean, this is like the coolest application, isn't it? It's a list of Star Wars movies, because I clearly don't know them all already. But anyways, so my navbar has links on it. And my links here, I've actually added prefetch attributes to all of them. So the About page is a different route, remember? But when I click on it, it sort of instantly rendered. That was a little bit slow. But basically, it was sitting there waiting in the background, because I was prefetching it in the background. But yeah. But however, this actually uses, so my films list uses an API, the Star Wars API. This is an open API, if you don't already know about it. So it's in most of my fake applications or test applications. So I have to fetch data when I do this. So say I load into my About page, and I could say pretend like I'm going to reload. So this is my initial load, and it's there. But because I have prefetch on my home page, on that link for the home page, what it does is it prefetches the page from the, so while I'm on the About page, in the background, after the About page has loaded, it starts loading asynchronously the code for the home page. But it's not going to do the data fetch. So you're not going to have an unnecessary data fetch. That only happens when the user actually clicks on the link. So that's just good to know that there's a separation between bringing the page and fetching the data. So what all do we get for free so far? We get automatic transpilation and bundling with Webpack and Babel, hot code reloading, server rendering and indexing of the pages folder, as well as static file serving from the static folder. And then they also have built-in CSS support with style JSX. That's only if you want to use it. You don't have to use it. I'll give you a brief glimpse of what it looks like. So this is what it looks like. You could just call a style JSX tag, and then you write CSS in there inside of a template string. That's what it looks like. You don't have to use it, but it's automatically set up to do that. It'll accept any CSS and JS solution, and then a lot more with plugins. The cool thing about their the repo on GitHub for next.js is that there's an examples folder, and there are so many examples. So whatever you want to use with it, it's probably in there, and they have an example of how you can use it. Oh, the other thing I didn't show you, but of course, I'm not even on my slide anymore, is that the back button works too. So going back and forth will work. All right. I guess it would be helpful if you could see the slides. So what about loading data? I talked about it, but I didn't show you what it's like. So loading data on page load happens with get initial props. It's a special lifecycle method they give you. It's asynchronous and static, and if you fetch anything that resolves to a JavaScript plain object, and you return that object, and that's what gets populated into your props. And a special lifecycle method was created so that it can work on either the client or the server. On initial load, it's executed on the server, and on navigation, not prefetching, but actual navigation is executed in the client, so like a future page path. It looks something like this. It will accept a path name, query, request, response, error, and there's a few other things. This is not good code. This won't run. So just don't associate the top line with the next line, because then I actually assign a response to something else. But I was just trying to show what things are available to use. But in here, I just use async await to fetch. Oh, it's already set up in their setup. But here, it's like I fetch from my API URL, and then I get the JSON from it, and I just return it. And now, all of a sudden, in my page component, that thing right there, will have props.mythings. So it'll be available to it. Sorry, that was loud. Or is it just when you're up here? So how do we do dynamic routes? Because we don't just have like home page, about page. That's just a website. That's not an application. Dynamic routes use query strings. So you set up a link with a path with a query string. Is that a little bit small? But basically, the link has, in my href, I now have a template string that says post question mark to start the query string. And then my variable I have in there for like the title of a blog post, for example. So that's how you create the link path. And then your target page component, so in this case, it would try to go find a file called post.js in my pages directory. And it would have something like this. It's just like a heading, and this is the blog post content. That's not usually how you write blog posts. But the target page component would look like that. And every page receives this URL prop. So you see how they access props.url, .query.title? Every page receives a URL prop that you can access. Children components don't receive it, so if you need it in a child, you need to pass it down from that page. And that comes with like path name and query, which are probably the top two you'll use. But you also have, for example, push and replace if you need to do some actions. But there is one frustration you'll probably come across, or that we've come across. There's no shared state across the page-based API. So different pages don't have shared state, which kind of makes sense because they're different bundles, they're different routes. So if you want a global state, there's a few options to you. You could wrap all your components with in a single page or route, and then from there use a custom routing API or something like React Router to have a separate set of routing just for the stuff that needs that same global state. Global is no longer global now, it's by page. You could also override, they have an API for an app component, and you can override that and in order to keep state across navigating pages. And but then, of course, like I said, they have examples in their examples folder, and one of them is Redux. There's MobX, Apollo and Redux. There's so many examples, so you can check those out if you really need a shared global state. So before, I guess I just went backwards. Remember, we have these dynamic routes with the query string, but that's kind of an ugly URL, right? What if I want a pretty URL? Well, oops, I'm going the wrong way. If you want a pretty URL, you can use route masking. So the only thing that's new here is that I have this as attribute, where now I can say my target place is, post question mark title equals title. But I can say I want to show that as /post/title instead. So prettier URL. That's cool. But then there's just one slight problem. What does a link do? Is it client-side routing or server-side routing? Anyone? Bueller? That was too American. Anyone? It does client-side routing. So what happens if I refresh this page? If I'm on this page and I refresh it, it will break. It will say 404 not found. And why is that? What would it? So it's a dumb server. There's just like a very simple. I'm dumb not in a bad way, but just like it doesn't know. And so where would it try to go if you tried to send it to like /post/myblogpost? Where would it actually try to go? Yeah, for a page. So it would try to go to a folder called post, and then another folder called my blog post, and then inside that folder an index.js. So the good news is that we can easily fix this. Or, I shouldn't say easily, because everyone knows what they know. Don't feel bad if it does not look easy. They have a custom server API. And if you here I've used Express. You can use any HTTP server. But it's not that much more complicated than a very basic Express server with a few pages defined. You hook into Next itself, and then you declare your app as Next, but you pass it in a variable or a property of whether you're in dev mode or not. And then it has a handler, and then that handler you set the server type, and here I've set it to Express, and then you can define your custom route. So down here is my custom route, which is really just if you see this route called oh, this is my Star Wars app. So of course it's /films/ID, so /film/1. Then I want you to send back to the application this last line where requests and responses just pass straight through. The path name is going to be /films, but the query params I'm just defining manually, and that's where I dump in the query params for how the server actually saw it. And then it will work again. So compared to some server APIs, it's not that complicated. There's also router events API, which is cool if you want to have like a loading indicator, because you're like, how would I show a loading indicator when I'm using this weird lifecycle method that's not really in React? Remember that get initial props? So you can hook into the router events, and they fire on route change start, finish, error, before history change. So you can do things like before and after the route changes. And so that's where you would hook into those type of events. What if you don't want to use a server? And actually, if you think about it, unless you have dynamic routes that have to be created in between times that you would build, then it might be more efficient to not have a server, just have a static export. Like, why are you rendering every time someone comes to the page? It should just be pre-rendered and sitting there and waiting. So next.js can also build you a static web app, which then you can just host on like GitHub Pages or AWS S3 or wherever you like. So to do that, or what it does is it generates pre-rendered HTML pages. And it supports almost every feature of Next.js, like dynamic URLs, prefetching, preloading, dynamic imports. But it does not support, like I said, if you have a dynamic page at runtime. So for example, at build time is OK. So I kind of cheated the Star Wars app because, I mean, like, how often does a new film come out? Not that often. And actually, they don't even have them all in here. They only have, like, the core Star Wars films. So there's 7 of them. So I'm like, I can build a static app from this because I know there's only 7. I'll just loop over those 7 to create a page for each film. So that was pretty easy. So that's how you, no. That's basically what you would do for a static export. OK, but I want to take it back for a second and talk to you about the airport in Houston and their baggage claim complaints. That's hard to say, claim complaints. English is hard. Especially for you. So I have no excuse. Anyways, so the international airport in Houston had all these baggage claim complaints. I forget how long ago this was, but like when you're sitting there, you're waiting for your baggage to come out on the carousel, and you're waiting and waiting. And they did have really slow times, but then they added a lot of people, and they measured it, and they were like, okay, well, now we're comparable to other airports. And what happened after that was like the complaints, they didn't go down. They were exactly the same, even though they were like industry standard times. So they were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So they started observing people, and they noticed that the walk between the gate and the baggage claim, can I do that? Like this walk? It was really short, so it was like right here. And so they're just sitting there waiting the whole time. So what they did is, so here I am at the gate. So they made it so that you would have to like, so now this is my path to black baggage claim. And the complaints went down. So they finally went down. So this is that, like, what does that actually demonstrate? That's that people are dumb. People are, so like unoccupied time is worse than occupied time. Like, remember the elevator? You're occupied when you're staring at yourself and like, fixing your hair. It's occupied time. And unoccupied time is longer and more painful because you're bored. I guess now we have smartphones, so people just look on those. But So when you think about performance, so this whole talk was about like trying to get faster, but I want to give you this little grain of salt. Performance is also perception, and so don't forget this. Like this is actually really important. Is that people are what a user's perceived performance is not the same as the actual performance. Like there's been studies of this, right? There was one, it's actually kind of a long time ago, but they did this study of like 10 different websites, and they measured the actual speed and then what the people thought were the actual speed. And the people thought that like, oh, like almost all of them were like, yes, these 3 websites are the fastest. And then they look at the actual data and they were the slowest. They were literally the slowest ones. And the ones that they thought they were slowest were actually the fastest. So I think the moral of the story is the actual, the content of your application and the user experience and how it's set up, the content is still king. So this stuff is cool. You can make your stuff faster. But don't, I guess, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't forget that the core of your app is still the content and make the best user experience. But anyways, those are just fun stories I like. Anyways, so these are some cool resources. I will share this link. You don't have to frantically copy things. Or clearly, there's actually, I just realized there's no actual links there. Or they are links, but you can't see them. That's really useful. You're like, thanks. They had this one speaker, she was terrible. No. But no, because this is Reveal Markdown. So I'm gonna deploy this, and it will actually work exactly the same. And I will share the link on Twitter, and then you can see this, and you can click on the links. You don't have to copy them down. But most of it's materials from Zeit. There's the initial when they launched, but and that explains the core features and the thinking behind them. But they've gone through several versions. Zeit is very aggressive on updating their applications. So it's great because there's cool new features all the time. They're trying to make it better. Of course, the repo itself has a lot of content. They have an official tutorial, which is nice to do, and the most recent version was version 5, so that's that link. And then this is an older link, the 7 Principles of Rich Web Applications. Guillermo Rauch is the founder of Zeit, and I guess he's probably the original writer of Next. But it actually it was the inspiration, or it was the thinking behind of it is the inspiration. It's just an interesting thing to think about if you like to read things about performance and things like that. And then I just did a workshop yesterday. And actually, the link I'll share will probably be the link that contains all of that. So maybe you can attempt to follow it yourself if you like as well. But anyways, thank you for listening. The link is not actually there yet. This is a general speaking page, but I will have it there, and I will tweet it out before the end of the day. But thank you for listening.